In 2 Chronicles chapter 16 verse 9, the prophet Hanani describes the eyes of the Lord as running to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong in the behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him. God's eye, so to speak, is able to comprehend in one glance everything which is taking place on the earth. He is privy to every parliamentary debate, sees into every home, and knows exactly where and when every autumn leaf will fall. Israel is the apple of God's eye. Zechariah chapter 2 verse 8 and Deuteronomy 32 verse 10. Both the land and the people. The same idea is present in the phrase, "He who watcheth over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps," Psalm 121 verse 4. The apple of the eye is the most sensitive part of that organ and is provided with a shield, the eyelid, which can protect it within a split second. God is taking note of how individuals and nations treat Israel and the Jewish people, and his recompense is with him. Isaiah 35 verse 4. Jesus himself spoke of a judgment to come which will be based on how people treated his brethren, the Jews. Matthew 25 verses 31 to 46. For they are the apple of God's eye. It's funny, don't you think, how some Christians think that our attitude to the apple of God's eye is unimportant or just a matter of personal opinion. Now, there's an unusual phrase in the Bible regarding the eye of man in relation to God. Numbers 14:14 says, "They have heard that thou, Lord, art among this people, that thou, Lord, art seen face to face." And the literal translation would be eye in eye. The Hebrew is Ayin ba'ayin, eye in eye. Now, the term eye in eye is used solely of man in relation to God, never for man to man. I would have to look very closely to see myself reflected in another person's eye, because the human eye is so small and the reflective part is even smaller still. Hence, when we read eye in eye, the picture is, listen to this, the picture is of a small person peering up into the eye of God and seeing himself reflected in his eye. Literally, eye in eye. This phrase is significantly more intimate and reverential than the phrase, say, eye to eye or face to face. We see ourselves reflected, our eye in his eye. We see as his eye of love sees us, and we are humbled. Humility is essential if we are to make any headway in the Christian life, which is why the flesh resists it. The flesh is proud by nature. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, it must have been a peculiarly humbling experience to be loved and served by one so superior to oneself. Serving is easier on our pride than being served. To sit still and be served is a thing which the natural man finds profoundly discomforting. Am I close enough to Jesus to be able to be described as eye in eye? Have I seen myself reflected in his eye of love? Has such love humbled me? It's already been remarked that the Ayin resembles a face with two eyes at the top. Now, the importance of using both eyes is emphasized by the sages. They explain that one eye is to focus on the greatness of God, and the other eye is to focus on our own shortcomings. The lack of either spells problems because our perspective will be all wrong. For example, in Numbers 16, chapter 16, we read of the rebellion of Korah, or Korach, however you want to say it, against the authority of Moses. Korah is able to see God's greatness. He says this, he says, all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them, he says in verse 3 of chapter 16. But he was unable to see his littleness. Rather, he was aware of his great lineage in verse 1, and that he was among those who were, quote, famous in the congregation, men of renown, verse 2. You see, he could see the greatness of the people, the greatness of God among the people, but he couldn't see the littleness and the humility. He was looking with one eye. Rashi remarks that, quote, his eye, singular, misled him. He was aware of the greatness of God above and around him, but he had no awareness of his own inadequacies. To be possessed of one eye, however clear, is insufficient in maintaining a right perspective. I may be inflated with pride or be possessed of a persistent sense of failure. The eye of the chazan, or reader, of the Torah scroll in the synagogue must alight upon every single letter of the text, and then, and only then, is he to speak aloud what he has seen. Even if he knows that text by heart, he must look at it. Now, this intimate link between sight and speech is reinforced by the fact that the Ayin is followed by the Pei in the Alefbeit, and we know the Ayin is I, so that's speaking of seeing, and only then do we get to the Pei, which is the mouth, and that's speaking. Only after we've seen can we speak. The order is critical. Jesus tells John the Baptist's disciples to tell John what things ye have seen. Luke chapter 7 verse 22. And Paul was told by Ananias that he was to be a witness to all men of what he had seen. Acts chapter 22 verse 15. Peter was an eyewitness of his majesty. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 16. Now, if we add the ordinal value of the Ayin, and the ordinal value of it is 16, that is to say it's the 16th letter in the Alefbeit, if we add that to the ordinal value of the Pei, which of course is 17, we arrive at 33. And the 33rd word in Torah is Tov, which means good. We are witnesses to the love of God in Jesus Christ. And when we speak out that which we have seen, it is good. The second city to be attacked by Israel in their conquest of the land of Canaan was Ai. Ai. But the battle was an ominous failure. Now, the name Ai derives from Ayin, which means eye. Therefore, Ai is the city of the eye. The reason for the defeat was traced to the sin of Achan. During the previous battle against Jericho, he had coveted forbidden booty and secreted it within his tent. You remember Joshua chapter 7 verse 21. It's a well-known story. Coveting is a sin directly linked to the sight of the eye. Achan, whose name is also related to Ayin, spelt Achan, again beginning with the Ayin, he lost the battle of the eye. He lost the battle of the eye. Israel lost the battle of Ai. It wasn't until Achan's sin was rectified that the city of the eye could be conquered and given to Israel. Joshua chapter 7 and chapter 8.